Part 2. Up the Missouri, the river. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark wrote in their journals after dark of all they had seen in the livelong day, up the Missouri all the way, of the surly Sioux in their feathers and pride, stalking down to the riverside, out of the plains and the high black hills, in their wampum and beads and porcupine quills, of beavers and bears and buffalo herds, of pelicans, swans, and sweet singing birds, of black bears robbing the honey bees and chasing the hunters up the trees, of white bears charging with foaming jaws and fiery eyes and terrible claws, of plunging ponies with flying manes and buffalo thundering over the plains. They drank of the wilderness mystery and the wild sweet wine of liberty. Its splendor and beauty filled their eyes with sunset pageants in western skies. Up the Missouri. The two tall captains in their army uniforms stood on the forward deck in the light rain. A gentle breeze filled the sail, and the rhythmic strokes of the 22 oarsmen drove the barge steadily upstream against the stiff current. At last they were through with the farewell dinners and balls, the toasts and speeches, the cheering and bowing. Before them lay the shining path of the winding river calling to adventure. The Missouri was calling them across the mysterious prairies to the unknown mountains. Each day unfolded a new wild world in which the unexpected waited around each bend of the twisting river. At the bow, Cruzat, the riverman, with his one eye scoured the changing face of the waters, reading in the swirls and eddies the signs of snags, sawyers, and sandbars lying in ambush just beneath the surface. The corps was divided into 3 messes commanded by sergeants Ordway, Floyd, and Pryor. Dreer and Coulter hunted along the shores, bringing in bear, deer, beaver, and other game for the pot. Out of the river the men yanked fat catfish. They camped at night on the low shores of willow-covered islands. The wary voyagers sniffed hungrily the fragrance of campfire supper at the end of each day's pull. The captains took turns daily at walking along the shore. Clark would take Dreer, Coulter, Shannon, and York for company. Lewis liked to go alone through the wooded bottomlands or across the empty plains. After supper, the captains sat on their bunks in the forecastle and wrote out the day's record, which they kept at the president's express order. Both were keen reporters, but it is hard to say which was the worst speller. Lewis used the most words, recording what he thought, along with what he saw. Clark put down facts briefly. Together, day by day, they kept a detailed and vivid record of all they saw and did. After supper, as the men sat gazing into the fire, Cruzat would draw his fiddle from a leather bag and strike up a lively dance tune. In a moment, hands were clapping and heels stomping in the antic capers of booted dancers. Suddenly, York would leap into the center of the circle and dance down all comers with a grotesque buck and wing. Through the night, there were always 2 sentinels on guard. The mournful wolf howls rose to the burning stars across the blackness of moving waters. As the men turned out in the gray dawn, they sometimes shook a live rattlesnake from a blanket or pillow where he had crept just to be warm and friendly. That helped to liven up one for the day's work. The captains gave names to the rivers that poured prairie soil and sand into the Missouri and to the numberless long willow islands dreaming in its rolling torrent. On the 4th of July, they fired off the cannon with cheers and named the creek they were passing Independence. They exchanged news with traders coming down from the Indian country on rafts. One of these was a Mr. Dorian, who had lived among the Sioux for 20 years. He was engaged to return upriver as interpreter. The men were learning that each depended on the others, and the lives of all might hang on the action of a single one. They were in a country where if a man slept on guard duty, stole whiskey, or disobeyed orders, it might have dangerous consequences for the whole party. Offenders were tried by court-martial conducted by the sergeants, with the men as jury. So many lashes on the bare back, according to the crime, was the army punishment meted out to the guilty. 2 deserters slipped off into the prairie. Dreer, keen as a bloodhound, trailed them to the Indian village where they were hiding. One, the Frenchman who was called La Liberty, escaped, but Dreer brought back Moses Ross, the other deserter. He was tried by court-martial and found guilty. He was sentenced to run the gauntlet 4 times. He was then dismissed from the corps. He was to go back with the French voyagers. The spirit of the corps was shaping its unruly members into a disciplined and unbeatable team. They grew tough-skinned and steel-muscled in their daily tussle with the river current and brown as Indians under the blistering summer sun. They drank muddy river water and broke out with painful boils. The captains had to act as amateur doctors and treated every ailment from sunstroke to snakebite with equal ignorance and with equal success. They passed through the Osage Indian country without seeing an Indian. It was the hunting season and the tribes were out on the prairie following the buffalo. Along the riverbanks were the melancholy sites of old Indian villages that had been abandoned because of war or smallpox. Along the river bottoms, wild grapes, plums, and berries were ripening in abundance. The president's instruction read, "In all your intercourse with the natives, treat them in the most friendly and conciliatory manner which their own conduct will admit." A good many in the corps had dealt with the Indians over the sights of their rifles. Peacemaking might be a difficult and delicate business. The various nations along the river had individual peculiarities and temperamental differences, and each would have to be dealt with accordingly. Jefferson had added, "To your own discretion, therefore, must be left the degree of danger you may risk, and the point at which you should decline, only saying we wish you to err on the side of your safety, and bring back your party safe, even if it be with less information." In 2 months they had toiled 600 miles up the winding river. The expedition had now come to the mouth of the River Platte, which flowed from the Rockies across 1,000 miles of prairie to the Missouri. Old-timers later were to refer to the Platte as a river 1,000 miles long and an inch deep. Indians at last, Council Bluffs. Dreer, hunting along shore, had surprised 3 Indians cutting up an elk in the high prairie grass. They were friendly and were sent back with an invitation to their tribe to meet with the white men on the river. Lewis, scanning the prairie with his spyglass, was the first to see the moving shapes in the long grass coming over the prairie. He could count 14 horsemen riding at top speed, their copper skins glistening in the sunlight and their long hair streaming in the wind. They dashed up and pulled in their lathering horses. A Frenchman who was with them came forward. He said that the party were Otos in Missouri from a nearby camp and that they would sit in council with the white men tomorrow. The captains gave them a hearty supper, after which the Indians rolled up in their blankets for the night. Next morning the Otos came and sat in the shade of the boat sail, which was spread for the occasion. The flag was run up and the corps paraded and saluted the colors. The swivel gun was fired with a terrific bang. The Indians looked on with expressionless faces. After the peace pipe had been passed, Lewis arose and made a speech, which the Frenchman translated. The captain explained that the Great White Father had taken over the land from the French and Spanish, who would come no more. The White Father wished his red children to be at peace. When there was peace on the river, the American traders would come, bringing guns and all the good things the Indians wanted. Each of the chiefs made a long speech in reply, saying they were full of joy at the change of government and would welcome the American traders, and they asked the white chiefs to make peace for them with their dreaded enemies, the Mahas. After the speeches, the captains presented the chiefs with medals, powder, whiskey, paint, and bright cloth. The fierce faces glowed with delight. Gay with the new gewgaws and the whiskey, they rode off over the prairie. The first encounter with the Indians was definitely a success. They called the low hills where they had met Council Bluffs. This was to be a good site for a trading post, a fort, and a town in the days to come. The little fleet toiled on up the snag-infested river that now wound and looped like a snake. They stopped to climb a cliff of yellow sandstone 300 feet high to see the burial mound of Blackbird, the renowned Indian chief. He had been famous for his magic powers and could even foretell when his enemies would die. The effect of his terrible medicine was due to the use of arsenic, which he had obtained from the white men. He himself had died of the smallpox and had been buried seated on his horse where he could forever look down the river. The Indians still left food there to comfort his departed spirit. The white men placed a flag on the pole that marked his grave and continued on up the river. Drew set fire to the prairie as a signal to the Indians that the white men had come to trade. In the tall prairie grass they came upon the charred ruins of a Maha village. It had been burned after the smallpox had wiped out 400 families. Farther on, the men senned in a creek and made a huge catch of hundreds of fish. It was a welcome change of diet. Sergeant Floyd was taken suddenly and violently ill. Captain Clark tended the sick man with all the care and science he knew. Next day Floyd said, "I am going to leave you. I want you to write me a letter." Clark wrote down his last words. Gallant Charles Floyd crossed the last frontier into the undiscovered country. He was buried on the top of the bluff with the honors due a brave soldier, and the place of his interment marked by a cedar post on which the name and the day of his death were inscribed. He was the only man of the party to die on the trip. Patrick Gass, the stocky Irish carpenter, was appointed by the captains to take Floyd's place as mess sergeant. Treating with the Sioux. A party left the river and trekked across the prairie in the August heat to see the Mountain of the Little People. The Indians believed this flat-topped mountain was inhabited by evil spirits who shot deadly arrows at all who came near. The white men found no traces of the Little People. As they returned to the river, they picked and ate delicious grapes, wild plums, and ripe berries. That night they again set fire to the prairie to signal to the Indians that they had come to trade. 2 days later, an Indian swam out to the boat with the news that a Sioux encampment was nearby. Next day, they camped at Calumet Bluff to await the Indians. Sergeant Pryor and a party had been sent 12 miles over the prairie to the camp with an invitation. The Indians came out and wanted to carry the white chief on a buffalo robe. Pryor explained that he was only a messenger sent by the white chiefs to invite them to their camp on the river. The Indians gave the white messengers a feast of stewed dog. The hungry men liked it. It was their first taste of man's best friend. 5 Sioux chiefs and about 70 men and boys came with Pryor to the camp. The next day, the Sioux sat in a circle under an oak tree by the river as Captain Lewis made a speech about peace and the advantages of trading with the Americans. Paint and ribbons, uniforms and medals were given to the chiefs, and the pipe of peace went around the beaming circle. The Sioux chiefs now retired for a private council, while the lean young braves shot magnificently with the bows and arrows for prizes of tobacco and trinkets, which the captains distributed to the winners. That night there was a dog feast and dancing around the campfires to the Indian drums. Next morning, the 2 captains in their uniforms took their place at the Indian council. The 5 chiefs, in their white buffalo robes, sat in a row smoking the peace pipe. Feathers decorated the black braids of long hair which fell over their shoulders. Their white buffalo robes were painted with crude pictures of battle scenes. Bear claw necklaces gleamed at their throats. The eldest chief rose and spoke. "I see before me my great father's 2 sons. You see me and the rest of our chiefs and warriors. We are very poor. We have neither powder nor ball nor knives, and our women and children at the village have no clothes. I wish that, as my brothers have given me a flag and a medal, they would give something to those poor people, or let them stop and trade with the first boats that come up the river. I will make peace with the Pawnees and Mahas together, and make peace between them, but it is better that I should do it than my great father's sons, for they will listen to me more readily. I will also take some chiefs to your country in the spring, but before that I cannot leave home." The long speech continued with pauses as Dorian translated. At the end, the younger chiefs arose and spoke in the order of their rank. They repeated the request and said they would open their ears to the white brothers' advice. The captains asked many questions and filled their notebooks with Indian lore. In the tribe were 4 warriors who were the sole survivors of a society which was sworn never to retreat in the face of danger. Once when marching single file across a frozen river, they had come to a hole in the ice. The leader kept straight on and disappeared forever. The rest were saved only by being dragged off by their friends. These braves were honored even above the chiefs. The Surly Sioux, the Big Bend, September 20th, 1804. Dorian was ordered to remain with the Sioux. He was instructed to make peace among the warring tribes and to persuade some of the chiefs to accompany him on a visit to the president in Washington. Peacemaking was a difficult assignment along the upper Missouri in 1804. For 2 weeks, the corps had been deeply anxious about young Shannon. Their 2 horses had strayed, and Shannon had been sent ashore to bring them in. When he had not returned after several days, Drewyer and Coulter had vainly scoured the shores for traces of him. 16 days later, coming around a bend in the river, they sighted a lean horseman riding down the riverbank. It was Shannon. He had found the horses, but thought the party had got ahead of him, so he had pushed on for 15 days. Nearly starved, he had finally given up and turned back just in time to meet them. Many times the men were sent out alone on dangerous missions, and always they returned in safety. The river was still a mile wide, but definitely shallower with more and meaner sandbars. Beyond the river bluffs, the prairie was alive with vast herds of buffalo and elk and the swift and beautiful antelope. The river teemed with beaver, swans, geese, duck, and sometimes pelicans. A sandbar in which they were encamped suddenly washed out from under them. They barely got the boats out from under the bank before it too caved in. The river was a tricky antagonist. One evening, 3 Indian boys swam out to the boats with word that 2 Sioux encampments were on the river just above them. They were sent back with presents of tobacco to the chiefs and an invitation to a council at the riverside. There was great excitement in the Sioux camps over the news that the white men in their great winged canoe were coming up the river. Black Buffalo, the ranking chief, wished to trade with the white men. There would be presents, and he was first in the receiving line. But the partisan, also a powerful chief, wanted to stop the expedition. If his braves could carry out a surprise attack, there would be much loot and many scalps. The younger warriors were eager to follow him, but the ever-watchful enemy always kept their floating fortress in the middle of the river safe from surprise attacks. 60 braves, magnificent in savage finery, came down to the council with the captains. Black Buffalo wore a white buffalo robe decorated with porcupine quills and a headdress of eagle feathers. The partisan was painted from head to foot in patterns of yellow and red and green. His leggings were trimmed with the scalps of his enemies, and 2 fine skunk skins dragged from the heels of his beaded moccasins. He was a fierce and splendid image of terror out of a nightmare. The captains were impressed in their uniforms with cocked hats and swords, though the soldiers were shabby in their worn deerskin shirts and leggings. But the bright flag in the wind and the perfect precision of their drill made a gallant show. Without Dorian, the interpreter, they could not understand each other's speeches, although the presents were accepted by the Indian chiefs with the usual pleasure and excitement. In the visiting back and forth from boat to shore, the Indians had been surly and insolent, and a quarrel between Clark and the partisan nearly came to blows, but Black Buffalo had intervened and kept the peace. The two chiefs had then come aboard for the night, although it had been a tense and trying day. They called their camp that night Bad-Humored Island. Next day, both sides were more friendly. The Sioux were preparing to celebrate a recent victory over their enemies, the Mahas, with a delicious dog feast and a ceremonial scalp dance. The shores were lined with excited squaws and children eager to see the white strangers. The captains went ashore and were carried triumphantly into the Indian camp on white buffalo robes. In the evening, they sat in the council circled with 70 solemn Indian warriors. Black Buffalo rose and pointed the ceremonial pipe to the heavens, to the earth, and to the 4 points of the compass. He was addressing the Great Spirit, the Father of the universe. The white men watched with awe the solemn rituals of the Stone Age. The pipe went around the circle. Black Buffalo made a long speech, which the white men could not understand. The stewed dog was served from the kettles with horn spoons. The captains tasted it sparingly and looked hungrily at the great pile of jerked buffalo meat which the tribe had presented them. Wood was heaped on the fires, and the center of the circle cleared for the dance.